Welcome to the Woman's Current. Is the tide turning? I'm Sylvia Beckerman.
And I'm Molly Wadzik. Together, we're exploring how women support women across generations, experiences, and perspectives.
From baby boomers to millennials and beyond, we're asking, are we lifting each other up? And how do we keep the tide moving forward?
Each week, we'll dive into real conversations with women who are reshaping the currents and reflect on what those stories mean for all of us.
So let's dive in. Let's get started.
Good girls don't want too much.
Today on The Woman's Current, we're exploring the stories women inherit about their bodies, their desire, and their worth. Our guest is Anna Rollins, writer, educator, and author. It's her memoir, Famished, on food, sex, and growing up as a good girl. In Famished, Anna examines how diet culture and evangelical purity culture, two forces that seem separate, actually reinforce one another. Both teach girls to distrust their bodies, to silence their appetites, to shrink themselves in every sense. Even before publication, the themes she's shared publicly has resonated deeply across generations. Molly and I are so glad to have Anna here with us today. Anna, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Molly, do you have any little intro as a millennial? I mean, I'm a baby boomer and we had Twiggy back in the 60s as the model that we were supposed to, be, and the Molly Quant little mini skirts.
I think Twiggy's body type is coming back into fashion, right? That's what it is. All these body types become trendy. And I think as, someone Anna's age is also a millennial who grew up in that good girl moment. Anna's work lands like right where I need it to. I'm looking forward to unpacking how these messages about food, sexuality, and worth shaped us and how we can start breaking those patterns across generations.
Anna, I want to start off by what led you to write Famished, and why did you choose to intertwine food, sex, and the good girl identity?
Well, I don't feel like I chose my topics. They kind of chose me. So when I was in undergrad, I majored in creative writing, and anytime I would write something that felt authentic, it usually ended up being about bodies and desire and God. And then I would get too embarrassed to turn it into my creative writing workshop. And so I would set that aside and then I would write something else. And it wouldn't be very good because I wasn't very interested in that thing, but it just felt too vulnerable. It was like these topics just kept in private. I wrote about them very passionately and furiously. And then I just would always tell myself well, I guess you'll never really write anything because there's no way you can write about that. So I resisted it for years and years, and I would write things that I wasn't really that interested in. And then I got further into academia and I would write academic articles. That was kind of where I funneled my desire to write. I've always been a writer. I've been scribbling in notebooks, writing e-zines, writing articles for my websites that I developed when I was a teenager. So I've always loved writing, but I wouldn't let myself really pursue these topics because I felt like they were too embarrassing, too vulnerable, not appropriate for me to share with a public audience. And then it was after I had my second kid. It had been a pretty traumatic postpartum experience, and it was right around the time of the pandemic, and my partner was an essential worker out of the house, and I was teaching virtually online, and I just had this moment where this sounds silly, but I just thought to myself, we could all die. We could all die, and I have this thing that I am really passionate about, and I'm not letting myself actually go there because I'm afraid of what people will think of me, because I'm afraid people will judge me. And so I had this moment. It was in the kitchen. It was April 2020. I had just gotten my baby down for a nap. I had a toddler. I think I turned on Paw Patrol for him, and I was just like, I'm gonna write this book. And I knew what it was gonna be about. It was gonna be about food, sex, and God. So I just kind of decided that I was gonna let myself do it, and that's what I did. So,
Well, one of the things is you've spoken about the rhyming scripts of purity culture and diet culture. What parallels did you see? I mean, as you were writing this, was this a part of it?
yeah. So when I first started writing these things, I didn't necessarily the pitch, like the rhyming scripts of purity culture and diet culture. I didn't have that pitch yet, but I knew that. So I'd grown up Baptist in evangelical purity culture, and purity culture was something that affected all of us who were raised in the 90s and the 2000s, because I should probably define that term.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, yeah. It's not just Christian sexual ethics. It was this force that arose as a reaction to the AIDS crisis. And so in the 90s, because sex it was this thing that people were afraid of. It could lead to disease or even death. Evangelical purity culture arose not just like in churches or in Christian settings, but also like in the public school system. So the students were signing True Love Waits pledges, like even in the public school system. And I don't know if you remember, like people would talk about the like virginity status of like 90s pop stars, like Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, Jessica Simpson. Everyone was like, if you read magazines at that time, people were like talking about whether or not they were still virgins, and they felt like this need to like share that they were waiting until marriage. Like they would say things like that. It was a huge part of the culture. And so I went to a Christian school, and so I was receiving religious education, but I took a class called Grace and Dignity, which was a class for girls, and it was like to teach us how to be good women. Which looking back, I realized like now it was like how to be good white women. Like it was very much like rooted in like white middle upper class womanhood. And I learned things like you should never pursue a boy. A boy needs to pursue you. If you go out on a date, they need to pay, but you need to be thoughtful of the fact that they're paying. So don't order too much. Try to order water. Like we had to be very careful about the way we dressed because we didn't want to provoke lust. And we were told things like it was very much assumed that you would be educated and you would get a degree, but ultimately like you would go back into the home to be wives and mothers and under the headship of a man. We were told things like maybe you shouldn't just save sex for marriage. Maybe like you would want to consider saving your kisses for marriage too. Like it was very it was extreme. It was very like rooted in the more you restrict, like the less you allow yourself to like have agency or desire. Even like ordering water at dinner, like it's very austere. But the idea was that like if you did these things, you would be rewarded with this like good, happy life. And it was sold as Christianity. Like this was part of Christianity. And at the time, like, I mean, you're a teenager, you're not like able to separate all that you're being taught. Like you're not, I didn't realize like that what I was being taught was rooted in like the Victorian ideal of the angel in the house. Like, I don't think my teacher knew that either. But so I'm being taught all these things about like what I'm allowed to want as a woman, how much space I'm allowed to take up. And it's also being reinforced in the larger culture, even though I'm getting a much more extreme version of it. And so, so that was kind of like my experience of evangelical purity culture. And I read all the, there's this whole like Christian book market. Like, I mean, my book is coming out with a Christian publisher, but if you grew up evangelical, you probably had very different media that you consumed than the larger culture. Like when I get together with my friends who grew up evangelical, like we have different pop stars that we know. We have different like series, chapter books that we know. Like it's its own like media ecosystem, and evangelical purity culture was a huge part of that. Like the evangelical purity culture equivalent of teen magazine was something called Brio. And so I would read articles not about like how to, get a guy to sleep with, how to please a guy in bed. I would read articles about like how to protect your brother from stumbling into sin, or like stuff like that. And I the chapter book equivalent of like Sweet Valley was something called the Christy Miller series. And so you're following these teens who like fall in love, but two of the main characters are saving their kisses for marriage so that they'll have like a better marriage once they finally do get married. So that's kind of like that's what I'm growing up in.
Anna, I got everything that I mean, obviously, we're around the same age, we have a lot of the same experiences growing up. And it's interesting what you say about how it permeated into like mainstream pop culture, because I grew up going to both like the Christian bookstore. I was raised Methodist, so not evangelical, my church was much more progressive. But I remember that interview with Britney Spears. Like even though these women had to be publicly Christian, right? That was also part of it. So I also grew up in that purity ring, like the True Love Waits Bible, the church retreat movement, and how desire was framed as this dangerous thing that girls were responsible for controlling. Like you're talking about, we're supposed to control it, right? The implication was always like your desire is going to ruin your life. So I'm really curious. Was there a turning point where you realized that you could trust your own desire, not just sexual desire, right? But like your desire for pleasure, connection, joy?
Yeah. I think it was slow. I think that I so I struggled with disordered eating for most of my adolescence, and I write about that in the book. And I think that I was able to make the turn a little bit when I went to college, and I went to a secular university, a public university. So I wasn't as immersed in so many rules. Like what I grew up in, and there are rules wherever you go. Like there are spoken and unspoken rules, but the extent of the rules, especially like policing what you are allowed to want and not want, like some of those went away. And it was really wild to me that like my relationship with food got better once I was in a space that wasn't as once I was under less stress. like once I felt less policed by authorities, once I felt um like what I wanted was a little bit more sanctioned. Like, so I found a lot of freedom once I left those really restrictive spaces. And I didn't leave the church. I was still involved in the church, but it just, um, I was in, less extreme, places. Yeah.
I want to ask you, when you started writing, did you expect the response you've already gotten from women online?
No. I no. I didn't think anyone would ever read what I had to say. Um, sometimes, like, I'll read my memoir. I wrote my memoir before I ever published a single byline, because I wrote my memoir and I was like, I think this is pretty good. And I had a few, like, I taught in an English department, so I had some friends who were writers, and I asked them to be beta readers, and they gave me feedback. And so I started querying, and like I didn't have a single byline. I'd published some academic articles, but I'd never like I think I had like one literary magazine that has since closed. like um and so then I got some responses from agents who were interested in my query, but they said you have absolutely no platform at all. I don't even think I had a social media account for my writing. I knew nothing about that part of it all. And I think that not having an awareness of that stuff allowed me to be really honest in my memoir in a way. Like when I read my memoir, it feels really pure. Like I'm really, I don't know, I'm not thinking about like pitching it or tailoring it. Like it,
Exactly.
yeah,
You're free. You don't have that constraint where you think you're supposed to make this segment happy or this is the trend here.
yeah, I really,
That's great.
it was great. It was wonderful.
It was
Um,
freeing.
Yeah. And so when I did start pitching, I like took some, I listened to some free webinars with Sue Shapiro, and I hired this great developmental editor, Jill Rothenberg, and they helped me like learn how to pitch. And when I got my first yes, and it was from HuffPost, I still remember I was in my office on Christmas break and I got the yes, and I just like walked around campus like stars were in my eyes. I couldn't believe this was like the beginning of 2022. And so no, I didn't, and then I was terrified because I thought to myself like, oh no, people are gonna know things about me. um, but no, I didn't think that I would ever get. No, I didn't.
So the good girl, I mean, I honestly had never really heard about this culture um, as deep. I mean, a good girl, back in the 50s or even in the earlier movies or in Victorian times, there were certain things you weren't supposed to do, if you were a good girl. Um, there was a chaperone, you didn't hold hands, or maybe you held hands, but this takes it to a whole new level. How did this being a good girl, you talked about you had and disordered eating for a long time even before, but how did this affect your relationship with food, for desire, for or autonomy, until you actually had a little bit more freedom? How did it put you in almost like a box?
Yeah. Well, I think that I had a hard time feeling allowed to want things. Like even, I mean, when I went to college, I even felt a lot of guilt wanting a career. I wasn't really sure if I was allowed to want a career. Um, because ultimately I felt like to be a good Christian woman, like I had to get married and have children and stay home with my kid. Like that was the message I'd been given. That's something that like I still feel guilt pursuing career related things. Like I mean that's something I've had to unpack, but um when I had my first child, I almost quit my job because I just felt so much guilt about um about leaving him to go to work. And one thing you're kind of, and that's a very privileged way to think, but also another thing that women in that culture, something I was taught was that like one way you contribute is by like buying less and like couponing, and like so it's like restriction in another way. Like the way a woman works is to stay home and like figure out how to make you it's not all like you're contributing through restriction. Does that, if that makes sense, through like monetary
No,
restriction?
it does. I mean, you're talking about a privilege of staying home with your child, and yet you're trying to maximize every little dollar. You're supposed to be good here, good there.
Yeah.
Um, so do you think women still perform good girlness today, even outside religious spaces?
I mean, I think that's what the whole trad wife movement is. And that's that's like an internet phenomenon, and trad wives are not the same as like stay at home mom. Like trad wives like adhere to this very like particular ideology, but I mean, and so part of it too is it's a reaction to a collapsing job market. and restricted rights for women just politically. Like, I think that that movement is finding resonance amongst women in part because, like, there is less. And so women are like, they see an avenue for going forward. I don't know, by adhering to like that script of like, want less, outside, like focus your world in in this very particular place. Everything kind of just gets smaller. I don't know what yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I this vividly remember that era where this good girl was much more louder, right? It's interesting they bring up trad wives because the great irony is that they're not just they're businesswomen. They're selling this life that isn't real because they're the ones that are making money and making content and working, but selling this ideal, right? But it's still this the same message about well, I guess I want to ask, do you think that this good girl identity too is also still a fear of taking up emotional space, right? Like the making yourself smaller, not upsetting anyone, not needing anything. I think that may be part of it too. Like if you do want something more, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Good girls don't want too much. They're not good. Yeah, exactly. It impacts every area of your life. It's not just like food, it's not just sex, it's not just ambition, but yeah, like emotions. like like I think that I think that I think about emotional repression a lot. And I was thinking about that in terms of I think that's something that people outside of conservative culture don't understand about women who have been socialized in this way, like how much emotional repression is involved and how much um judgment of emotion there is. Like people who show emotion are almost weak. Like I wrote an article for Slate, and I don't I got a big response for it, and it was after the election, and it was about like how I felt like the Harris campaign could have maybe gotten some white women to vote for them, but they pegged them wrong. Like they tried to appeal to emotions a little bit too much, but like a lot of conservative white women they don't that that is like
Again,
counter
no
to,
emotion.
yeah, that's counter to what rhetorically works for them. So yeah.
Yeah, because it's almost like it's a safety thing, right? Like that culture of fear and control that you talk about, where it's like if I am emotionally vulnerable and show emotions, like I'm going to be less safe.
And I think it's a point of pride, right? Like you have to work really hard. Like it's not just like fear. It's also like these people who are showing their emotions, they're weak. Do you know how freaking hard I work to shove all this down? Like I think there's an anger there. Um and so I think that's part of it too.
Well, do you think, am I right? Do you think that anger is going to start boiling up? I mean, do you think there'll be a breaking point where, you're tamping down on all these emotions that one day you're just going to explode?
And I think it like it has to come out some way, right? Like I don't know, who knows how. Like I've seen it in my own life. When I'm, just like clenching, like it comes out often in places where I feel safe, like often with my family. Uh, yeah, I think that but, but where, like, and that'll vary for each person. But yeah, I think you're right. You can't just like shove things down and expect that it's just going to stay there. That's not how it works. So.
It's gotta, I mean, we're human. At some point, it's got to manifest itself. And we talked a little bit about disordered eating. Um, that often grows in silence. There has been a lot written of the silence of this, and it's so prevalent, especially in young women going through. What silences surrounded you?
Hmm. I, well, I felt so much shame. And I also always found myself questioning. I knew I had a problem. I knew that what my feelings and behaviors toward food were extreme and all encompassing and but I also didn't ever think they were bad enough. I also thought like, well, maybe this is just what women are supposed to do to be healthy. Because so much of disordered eating is also like sold to us as like health through like diet culture. They're they look very similar. Um, and when eventually I did get up enough courage to ask for help, I had people dismiss me. I had people say like, "Oh, well, that's something a lot of women struggle with," or like kind of as a way to be like, "Oh, yeah, that's just kind of what it's like to be a woman." And so like when your problems are treated as nothing, then you kind of wonder like, well, maybe this is nothing. So um I think that because the line between disordered eating and like health can be really thin. I think that's really
Very thin.
yeah, I think that's really tricky for us to navigate as a culture. Um, I think it's also a really intimate thing that people, like everyone talks about their diets, but people don't talk about struggling with disordered eating. And I think that we know that when it becomes a problem, it usually like has to do with emotions or sex or like there's something very intimate going on. And so I think that it makes people uncomfortable in that way.
And I love that your writing forces people to be uncomfortable. I think I really, and I see how much like coming from the childhood and background that you did and talking about just being that this kind of fear, correct me if I'm wrong, like a fear of maybe being perceived a little bit
Mhm.
because the culture we grew up in is like if you're being perceived, you're being too much, right? I'd love to know what helped you separate hunger from moral failure, because I've obviously received a lot of the same messages with um just hunger for anything. It's still such a source of shame
Mhm.
for women our age.
Yeah.
How do you separate that moral failure piece from it? Do you have any advice maybe to
Yeah.
other millennials our age who are still picking this apart?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard because, like, I think about the ego a lot, and ambition. So, um, I, to try to get a book deal, I was hungry. Like, I went after all these bylines and I would play this game in my head. I'd be like, am I like, is this my ego or is this like healthy hunger? Um, so I think about that, and I think that, I don't think you always know. And I think that like being okay with not knowing is okay. Um, I do think it's, I don't know. I don't think it's a bad thing to question whether your hunger is moving into something nefarious. But also I think that the more we can show up as ourselves, like more fully ourselves, like the more we can help others. I think that and that requires like having an appetite and going after something. And so like disappearing means that you're not contributing, you're not like you have something to offer, and that requires hunger. So like these things are complicated because yeah, like like it can shift into something unhealthy, like it can, but not always.
And I don't think a lot of us realized, I mean, I have like a similar journey. I struggled with an eating disorder in my late teens, my early 20s, but I don't think a lot of women realized they had disordered eating until like our 30s because it looked so normal at the time, like you were talking about. Sylvia, I would love to hear like your input here about how maybe what you've seen younger generations, like what, I don't know. I just love this conversation about this idea that women's hunger and appetite has always been tied to this, and those through lines that you're connecting here, Anna. I think that's the next evolution of this conversation, not whether we're talking about like being influenced by AI images rather than Photoshop or having body types be trendy, but recognizing that these ways that impact our hunger and desire, and facing patterns in our ways of eating and like viewing food and viewing control.
Well, eating is one of the things that we actually have control over. The rest of the world, and I'll never forget, something happened once where I was told that, somebody who was going for help, and they were overweight at the time, and the therapist said that that is really their only control that they have, and that is food, whether they want it or they don't. The rest of it is all how society is going to perceive them. What job can they get? What school can they go to? What friends? That all has to do with their environment. It's not a single thing. And I know that I did not have disordered eating per se. I had emotional eating. I just ate, and I ate crap. I mean, I got candy bars. My mother used to say to me, because she'd find the wrappers in my drawer, and my father would say, if you're going to do it, don't get caught. If you're going to get caught, just don't do it. But it was the whole idea of, that was emotional for me. Um, and then when you grow up, no, there wasn't, social media. But again, it's a control that you have, which some people take to, it's the only control they have. And it just falls into a black hole that they can't get out of. Because any other desire, really, you need someone else or something else, the environment around. Something like writing, you can do on your own, but there aren't a lot of things like that that you can. So, what I'd like to ask both of you is, do you see anything that the prior generations have influenced this, all of this good girl?
When you were talking about eating as the thing you can have control over, there was a counselor that I spoke to and thought this was fascinating. She worked with a lot of Southern evangelical women, and she said that she noticed in her practice that extreme dieting was a good girl's drug of choice. And I thought that was such an interesting observation, because it's a way you can rebel while still being good. Like these women that she worked with, they were often still praised, and but that was the way that they were doing something quietly wrong. That was the thing, yeah, like what you were talking about. They could have control over that, but still,
So being quietly wrong,
yeah.
would that give them power, that they're supposed to be good girls, but nobody knows the secret,
Yeah.
that they are really inside in their own minds? Because there are some extreme diets that were going around, and now there's even more. Somebody goes on TikTok or something and comes up with some nonsense where you're going to drink this vinegar or that one, or you're going to do this or you're going to do that. Um, so to me, it's almost gotten a little bit, there's too many choices. If this one doesn't work, let's try that. And that's that secretly doing something wrong that no one will supposedly notice.
Yeah, I think the secrecy and the power someone gets out of it, I think that's a huge part of it. I mean, I think that's part of the reason people don't talk about disordered eating is because it's not just about desire, it's about power. It's like, um, I mean, there's a lot like a thin body is it, you have privilege. Like, you're going after, even if you are like weakening yourself, like in so doing, you're gaining like some cultural power. It's this like it's operating on multiple levels. And so I think, yeah, that's a huge part of it.
Oh, I so agree. And I think too, for a lot of women who are afraid to talk about it or get uncomfortable with it, like you said, it also is like, don't take this thing away from me.
Yeah.
Like this is the one thing that I can control. If this is out of my control, then I don't I don't have an identity anymore almost because it's the only thing they control. Um,
Hmm.
I look at Gen Z, Anna, sometimes, and I think like they're naming things we didn't have language for, right? Like body neutrality, the types of conversations we're having around consent and the expansion of like the queer spectrum. I wonder what your what you think of when you see pushing the culture forward in ways that maybe we couldn't, while also this rise, the trad wives, like you're talking about. What kind of conversational space is there now to still remind Gen Z this this stuff is very prevalent. It just is packaged way differently now.
Hmm. Yeah, because it's almost like we made gains with the body positivity movement, and at the same time, there were like gains in civil rights. And that's how things go, right? Like, I don't know who said this, but when women's rights shrink, women's bodies shrink. And it seems like throughout history, there's always this like, there's um there's a backlash to whatever has whatever progress is made. There's a backlash. We have these extreme reactions. And I agree, like, I wish that I had had the language to talk about, I mean, consent was something that was very absent from evangelical purity culture, or autonomy, or like all of that was absent. Um, and yeah, I feel like they have language, but then there are also things that they're missing too. Like, I don't know if you feel this way, but sometimes the language, because it's used so often on the internet, I think the phrase is like words become shitified. Like when when like therapeutic language or like these kind of buzzwords, when people use them so frequently and so broadly as a means to gain attention on the internet, like people no longer really listen to those words, or like those words aren't valued. And so I do think some of that is happening, even though the conversation is becoming more robust. It's also like shrinking because of the way we, um, because of the internet, because of the algorithm, like because we want like clickbait and quick fixes rather than like going deep and long. So
I want to shift a little to sex, purity, culture, and desire. Many women remember the rings, the retreats, the rules. What messages about sex stayed with you the longest?
you know, it's so because I grew up very like immersed in evangelical purity culture. I don't think I had a ring. I think I signed a pledge. I definitely made a list of all the things I wanted my future husband to have, which were like, you know, like we wrote letters to our future husbands in Bible class. Um, and uh, so, but my parents were not perfect, but they like they weren't ashamed to talk about sex, which that was something I had going for me, but I still did not know very much about my own body. And I knew, like, I had been taught that if I did not, like, it was very important in every area of my life that I wait until marriage. Um, And in the book, I write about like kind of the aftermath of that. I did wait until marriage, and my husband waited until marriage, and we I struggled with something called vaginismus, which is like it's a psychosexual condition where you have involuntary contractions of the pelvic floor whenever you try to have sex, and it's very common amongst women who grew up in like conservative religious spaces. I think it's 1 in 4 women who grew up in those types of spaces struggle with this condition, and that's double the rate of the general population. And so for years, I had like extreme, excruciating pain during intercourse, and I didn't know what was happening. I just thought like I was broken. I felt so ashamed. I went to a doctor once, and they like kind of just dismissed me. They didn't really know what was going on either. They told me to like relax and like use lube, and like if you learn about the condition, like it's much more complicated than that. And so I dealt with that for years, and I had so much shame, and I didn't know that probably the reason I was dealing with it was because I had internalized so much like shame about sex growing up, and like I had been so hyper vigilant, like it was so important that I control my body and I keep anything from happening to me, that like that didn't just magically go away after I got married. And so I was married to someone who was supportive, but he also didn't know what was going on. He was kind, but also like, I mean, it was incredibly hard for both of us. Yeah.
I thank you for sharing that. Like that, I know you talk about being afraid to put your story out there. I can't imagine, writing this book, it must feel a little bit out of control. Like you are challenging yourself in your own upbringing to like let go of this control, right? Because now your story is out there and you don't have control
No.
how it's perceived, where it goes. But I love this this thread that you're connecting here with purity culture, leaving us with like a lifelong fear that our bodies will betray us. And it seems like you kind of experienced that, right? Like, did you feel a sense of betrayal? Like, here you are trying to control everything. That's what you're taught, right? That's what a good girl does. And then did you feel like punished a little bit? Did you feel
Yeah.
a struggle against
Yeah,
that?
I was mad.
Yeah. Yeah.
So angry.
You're like, I waited. I did what I was supposed to do.
Yeah. And I had friends who kind of dealt with similar things, and some of them left the church. Like people, like I remember having drinks. Like we wouldn't speak directly about it, if that makes sense. Like I remember having drinks with a friend, and I described this in the book, and she had waited until marriage, and her husband had waited until marriage, and she like kind of told me tearfully that like she was upset about something. I couldn't totally understand what she was upset about. And then she told me like how mad she was at God and how she couldn't go to church anymore. Um, and at the time, I was not married at the time, so I didn't know that I was going to be dealing with this condition. Um, I didn't really know what she was telling me, but looking back, I think that's what she was telling me. Like she had been sold this script, and this script was supposed to result in like this happy life, and it had not. and it and yeah, I was angry for a long time. And finally, like I was able to get some help. I started going to a pelvic floor therapist, and she was incredible. And like finally I was able to get some help, but like man, it was the internet that like helped me. It wasn't doctors. It wasn't like it was me having to like figure out all this stuff. Yeah. So I mean, it definitely feels it's like exposure therapy, right? Like you've been told your whole life to control everything, and I'm like, whoa, let's put this all out in a book. But I do like hope that now that I'm at a different point in my life, it does feel like I'm talking about like this past version of myself. And I do hope that like it helps other people. Like if me telling my story means that some woman doesn't feel the way I did, um, then that's worth it. So
So, at what point did you start realizing that you do have autonomy, that you did not in all your being a good girl and having this happen and having waited until you got married and then having years of pain, and then finally through the internet figuring out what was going on. How did that journey even take place?
Um, I think having my kids, I think with each child, I realized more and more that like if I wasn't going to make some choices, like I couldn't just be passive and like follow the rules. I really learned that after my second child. I had like a traumatic postpartum experience and I sort of like something just cracked in me and I thought, if I'm not going to fight for me, no no one is going to fight for me. Um and I also like wanted to model that for my children. Like I realized too in parenting my children, like I had to grow up. I couldn't be a child anymore. I think that like purity culture teaches girls to remain girls. Like you're supposed to be small and like like no ambition and like no agency and like you're almost supposed to be like childlike forever. And I learned that with my children too. I was like, no, like my kids need an adult to parent them. Um like I need to be big like to to take good care of these kids. So I think that having children really helped me with that.
Molly, do you have anything you'd like
Yeah,
to?
yeah, I was just gonna say, I also think, pregnancy and childbirth and postpartum period obviously changes our relationships with our bodies too. We're all mothers, we all know that. But especially from the themes that we're speaking about today, I know my pregnancy has really changed my relationship with my body because all of a sudden I didn't have the choice to give in to that control, right? Because now I'm growing this thing inside of me that needs nourishment. I have to eat. I have to eat. I have to listen to my body. But the postpartum period was especially stressful, struggling against that control and that the messages around like how quickly we're supposed to bounce back. And I know that's not the genesis and the central theme of the conversation, but I guess in thinking about raising my own daughters, I think about this constantly. Like, how do we teach them to trust their hunger in all the ways we're speaking about when we were taught to fear ours? Like, we're unpacking this while also trying to raise children and hoping that we're doing a better job with the information that we have. Do you have anything to say about that? About like like raising kids to trust their hunger?
Yeah. Yeah, I think about cuz I'm not somewhat like I I look at my mom and I think she did a lot of things right. I she didn't criticize other women's bodies. She didn't ever speak about dieting. Like that was pretty radical. That was a gift that I was given. And I still struggled with disordered eating. And I think that like we can't escape the culture we're in. And I really think that like there are a lot of things I can do to help my daughter. Um those same things, like not speaking about dieting, not criticizing other people's bodies. But I really think that like one of the biggest things we can do is to fight for like a healthier culture. And like I think about what I was when I think about something I wish I were taught more. I was not taught self-advocacy. That was not part of that. I don't think that my mom was necessarily taught self-advocacy. I don't think that that was part of the good girl narrative. I hope that's something I can teach my daughter because I think that that has a lot to do with like our beliefs that we deserve to go after our appetites. And so that is something that, I mean, she's not even two, but yeah, that is something I want to teach her.
Yeah, and it feels like your book gives women permission to want. I think
So
it's a really big thing, giving women permission and girls permission to want again.
yeah, yeah, thank you. I hope so.
So, Anna, last question. If you could rewrite the rules of girlhood, What would the first new rule be?
Ooh. uh, that there are no rules. I don't know.
Good.
Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, uh, don't we all like feel kind of constricted? Like, wouldn't it just be nice to feel like we can be the human being that we were supposed to be, that we were born to be? Um, yeah, yeah.
Well, Anna, where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, my memoir, Famished on Food, Sex, and Growing Up as a Good Girl, is available. You can follow me on Substack and Instagram at Anna J. Rollins, and then I'm also at annajrollins.com.
Perfect. Anna, I want to thank you for having such an open, candid conversation and for the memoir, what you've done for people not just your age, youngers, and also the older generation to actually hear about this and understand it.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me space to have this conversation. This was fun.
Thanks, Anna. I'm so excited. Congrats on your book.
Thank you.
I'm so excited for Out in the World. I know it's really going to help a lot of people. And I hope that, a lot of men and boys read it too. I really hope that's a big part of our cultural change is like, obviously boys struggle with eating disorders, but they're not wrapped up in this whole purity culture and good girl culture that you are. Um, but yeah, I feel really hopeful and I'm super grateful for your work. And thank you for coming here today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for all you do, all your writing. I love your writing. Thanks. Bye.
What a great conversation. She reminds us that, shrinking in body and voice and desire, it's not destiny, it's conditioning, and conditioning can be undone. And she's done an amazing job, not only within herself, but in being able to put this out there.
Yeah, and I really like the part of the discussion where she's talking about, I don't remember if she said it explicitly, but maybe it was a reaction I had in my head about like this still being part of the journey. She said it feels like I'm writing about my past self, but this is still part of who she is. This is still part of her story. It is still something, it doesn't go away. These cultural scripts that we're raised in and conditioned in. It's how early it all gets planted, right? The food rules, the good girl scripts, the way desire gets framed as something to manage instead of something to understand. And I really appreciate the way Anna showed how those messages don't just shape the way we act, but they shape how we see ourselves. And the deconstruction that she's done with that in her work, in this book, and in her conversation, I think I'll be thinking about that for a long time, about how women can take their appetites back in like every sense of the word, right?
Exactly. And as I said, I had not heard about this. I had heard little, pieces, but I'd never known that this particular culture existed. I hadn't been exposed to it. I know about tradwives, but I had no idea of this whole section. And so it was fascinating. And for her to have that courage and that giving herself permission to do this and to put it out there, I think is fantastic, and helpful. And as we know, if it helps one person, but we've already seen that it's helped more than one person.
Yeah, it's that permission, and no one else is going to give it to us, right? Like
Nope.
Anna's talking about, we have to give it to ourselves. And um, what do you didn't sign a True Love Waits Bible. I I just I forget how much it was. I think a lot of us try to block that out. Those of us that were raised in it, this whole idea where we were supposed to sign away our agency, and that's what Anna's talking about, right? Like if there's one thing for the next generation, it's like letting little girls know that they have agency and their desire is something important and big and not something to tamper down.
Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for introducing and suggesting Anna, because this has been a very important conversation. That's it for this episode of The Women's Current, Is the Tide Turning?
If this conversation sparks something in you, we want to hear from you. What's this week's current moment? Tell us on Instagram at The Women's Current. Share it with a friend. And don't forget to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube.
Join us each week as we explore how women are supporting each other and where do we go from here.
Until next time, I'm Molly Wadzik.
And I'm Sylvia Beckerman. Thanks for listening.
This has been a Life of Prey production.